The rain hammered against the marble headstone as Marcus Wellington knelt in the mud. His $1,000 suit ruined, his carefully constructed world shattered. His shoulders shook with sobs that seemed to tear from the deepest part of his soul. "I'm so sorry, Elena," he whispered, pressing his palm against the cold stone. "I was a fool. I had everything and I threw it away for nothing." From behind a towering oak tree 50 feet away, a woman in a simple black coat watched, her heart fracturing with every sob that echoed through the cemetery. Elena Wellington was very much alive, and seeing the man who had ignored her for 5 years finally break was almost too much to bear. Marcus Wellington had built an empire. At 42, he commanded boardrooms across 3 continents, owned properties in 7 countries, and had a net worth that placed him among the world's elite. But 18 months ago, his wife Elena had died in a car accident, or so everyone believed. The funeral had been attended by hundreds, business associates, society figures, politicians. But Marcus had stood at the graveside like a statue, barely shedding a tear. People whispered that the billionaire had ice in his veins, that even tragedy couldn't penetrate his cold exterior. What no one knew was that Elena had orchestrated her own disappearance. The marriage had been dying slowly, suffocated by Marcus's obsession with wealth and status. Elena had spent years trying to reach the man she'd fallen in love with in college, the passionate student who'd dreamed of changing the world, not just accumulating zeros in a bank account. She'd thrown intimate dinners that he'd missed for board meetings. She'd planned anniversaries he'd forgotten. She'd waited up countless nights in an empty bed while he closed, deals in different time zones. The breaking point came on their 10th anniversary. Elena had spent weeks planning a surprise, a recreation, of their first date at a small Italian restaurant, where they'd shared a single plate of pasta because they were too poor to order 2 meals. She'd rented out the entire restaurant, which had since become famous at enormous expense. She'd worn the same blue dress, now vintage. She'd waited for 3 hours, calling his phone repeatedly, before the owner gently suggested she go home. Marcus had been in Tokyo celebrating a merger. He'd forgotten entirely. That night, Elena made a decision that would change both their lives. She would disappear, stage her death, and watch from afar to see if Marcus truly loved her, or if he'd simply move on to the next acquisition. With help from her childhood friend Rebecca, a lawyer who understood the complexities of such a plan, Elena faked the accident. A car over a ravine, a fire that consumed everything, dental records that Rebecca had carefully manipulated through contacts. It was elaborate, expensive, and possibly illegal, but Elena was desperate to know the truth. She expected Marcus to grieve for a week, perhaps a month, then return to his empire building with barely a pause. She expected to feel vindicated in her decision to leave, to start over somewhere far away with a new identity. She never expected this. For the first 6 months, Marcus had indeed seemed unchanged. He attended the funeral with dry eyes, accepted condolences with polite nods, and returned to work the next day. Elena, watching from a distance using Rebecca's network of contacts, felt her heart harden. She'd been right about him. But then something shifted. Marcus began visiting the grave every Sunday morning, then every Sunday and Wednesday, then every day. His company started missing him at crucial meetings. Deals began to fall through. His board of directors expressed concern. Marcus didn't care. Elena watched through binoculars, from various vantage points as her husband transformed before her eyes. He would arrive with flowers, not expensive arrangements from florists, but simple bouquets he'd clearly picked himself from the garden Elena had once tended. He would kneel for hours, talking to the gravestone as rain, snow, or sunshine beat down on him. Through Rebecca's sources, Elena learned that Marcus had changed everything about his life. He'd started the Elena Wellington Foundation, donating millions to causes his wife had cared about: literacy programs for underprivileged children, animal shelters, environmental conservation. He'd sold 3 of his mansions and downsized to the modest house where they'd lived. When they first married, he'd cut his work schedule in half and started volunteering at a homeless shelter every Saturday, something Elena had begged him to do with her for years. He'd found the journals Elena had left behind, filled with her thoughts, her loneliness, her love for him. Rebecca reported that Marcus had been hospitalized briefly after reading them, devastated by the realization of how badly he'd failed the woman, who'd loved him unconditionally. Now, 18 months after her death, Elena stood in the cemetery watching the man she'd left behind fall apart, and she realized she'd made a terrible mistake. "I would give every dollar, every property, every achievement," Marcus sobbed, his voice carrying through the quiet cemetery. "I would give it all for one more day with you. One more hour, just to tell you that you were right about everything, that I was chasing shadows while the sun was right beside me. Elena, you were my everything, and I was too blind to see it." He pulled something from his pocket, a small, worn photograph. Elena's breath caught. It was from their first date, taken in a photo booth at a carnival. Two young people squeezed together, laughing at the camera with no idea what the future held. "I found our old apartment," Marcus continued. "The landlord let me visit. I stood in that tiny kitchen where we used to dance when we couldn't afford to go out. I remembered how happy we were when we had nothing. And I realized I spent 20 years gaining the world and losing my soul." Elena felt tears streaming down her face. She'd wanted to teach him a lesson, to make him realize what he'd lost. But she'd never intended this level of devastation. She'd never wanted to destroy him. "I'm selling the company," Marcus said softly. "I know you can't hear me, but I need to say it. I'm selling everything. I'm going to spend whatever time I have left trying to be the man you deserved. The man I should have been." That's when Elena stepped out from behind the oak tree. Her legs felt weak as she walked across the wet grass. Marcus was still kneeling, his head bowed, so absorbed in his grief that he didn't hear her approach. She stopped 5 feet behind him, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. "Marcus," she said softly. He froze. For a long moment he didn't move, didn't breathe. Then, slowly, he turned around. The look on his face, shock, disbelief, hope, fear, was something Elena would remember for the rest of her life. He rose unsteadily to his feet, his eyes wide, his face pale. "Elena?" he whispered, as if afraid speaking her name would shatter the vision before him. "I'm alive," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Marcus took one tentative step toward her, then another. Then he was running, and she was running, and they collided in the middle of the cemetery in an embrace that held 18 months of grief, regret, and desperate love. They sank to the ground together, holding each other as if they'd never let go again. Marcus cupped her face in his hands, tears streaming down his cheeks, examining every feature as if memorizing her all over again. "You're real," he kept saying. "You're really here." "I'm here," Elena sobbed. "I'm so sorry. I just wanted to know if you loved me. I wanted to know if I mattered more than the money and the success. But I never meant to hurt you like this. I never meant—" "You did matter," Marcus interrupted fiercely. "You mattered more than everything, and I was too stupid to show you. Elena, these past 18 months without you have been hell, but they taught me something. They taught me that everything I was chasing was meaningless without you. You were right about all of it, and I'm sorry I made you feel like you had to die to make me see it." They stayed there in the cemetery until the sun began to set, talking, crying, apologizing, and slowly beginning to heal. Elena explained everything, the planning, the watching, the growing horror as she realized what her deception had done. Marcus listened without anger, understanding why she'd felt so desperate. "I don't deserve forgiveness," Elena said finally. "What I did was cruel." "What you did was show me the truth," Marcus replied. "Yes, it was extreme. Yes, it hurt more than anything I've ever experienced. But Elena, I was dead inside long before you staged that accident. I was a shell of a person chasing things that didn't matter. You gave me a chance to become human again." They decided to start over. Not in a mansion or penthouse, but in a small cottage by the ocean that Elena had been renting under her assumed name. Marcus did sell his company, keeping only enough to sustain the foundation and their simple life. They volunteered together, traveled to places they'd always talked about visiting, and spent their days doing what they should have been doing all along, living. The scandal when Elena returned from the dead was enormous. Some called her manipulative. Others called Marcus's transformation cynical, but the couple didn't care what the world thought. They'd both been given a rare gift, a second chance. A year later, they stood on a beach at sunset, renewing their vows in a ceremony attended only by close friends and Rebecca, who cried through the entire event. "I promise," Marcus said, holding Elena's hands. To never again confuse success with significance. To never again mistake accumulation for achievement. To remember that the greatest wealth is standing right here in front of me. I promise, Elena replied, to never again test your love. To communicate instead of disappear. To remember that marriage requires courage from both people. The courage to be vulnerable, to be honest. To choose each other every day. They'd found their way back from the darkness, both changed irrevocably. Sometimes, Elena thought, people need to lose everything to understand what they truly have. And sometimes, love requires not just commitment, but transformation. As they walked hand in hand along the shoreline, the waves washing away their footprints behind them, they carried no regrets. Only gratitude for a love that had survived the ultimate test, and the wisdom to never take it for granted again.